Okay, good morning. What's up, everybody out there in the orange world? I've been wanting to do a video like this for a long time. I run a Rockerverb MkIII 50 water, and I'm just doing a quick video on biasing, more or less. I get a lot of people that ask me about it, and I would gladly help anybody learn how to do it. With that being said, it is dangerous to be inside of the amp with the power on. Even with the power off, it is dangerous to be inside of a tube amp. Tube amp capacitors, especially the filter capacitors and stuff like that, will retain major voltage, 500 volts, 200 volts, DC, enough to make your day terrible or pretty much end it altogether. That being said, I'm going to show you kind of a quick rundown on how to bias an amp. Basically, there are some tools that you're going to need. You're going to need multimeters. You're going to need, I would use bias probes. They are not necessarily necessary with the orange Rockerverb, and I believe the dual dark. You can probe off of pin 5 on the power tube section and actually get your millivolt reading for your bias adjustment. The probes make it a lot easier because that's less hands going towards the inside of the amp. Yeah, so the bias probes are great. I would say definitely a must. I grabbed mine from Eurotubes. They're about 28 bucks a piece. If you got a a 2 power tube amp, or 50 watt or 100 watt, grab what's necessary. It makes life so much easier having 2 probes, 2 meters, and a 50 watt, as opposed to me having to undo the one and then redo the other to make sure they're balanced and stuff like that. I will put up here during the time that I'm doing this the math equation on how we figure out the biasing. So I'll explain it to you right now. So what it is we find the plate voltage first. That's number one. We need that. So let's just say that's 460 volts, okay? Now we got to know the tube output max wattage. So an EL34 max wattage is 25 watts, okay? And this all can be looked up. The tube data sheets are all over the internet, and you can find them. You could even find them specific to the brand tube. Like if you're using JJ, they have tube data sheets. But I would say 99%, 100% EL34s are 25 watts, okay? So we take the number 25 watts and we divide that by our plate voltage, which is 460. The number that comes out of that, we take that number and we multiply it by 0.7. That being 70% of dissipation of the tube wattage, okay? Whatever that number ends up coming out being, say it's like 37 or 38 or whatever, that's your milliamp rating you're trying to achieve when you're biasing it, okay? Or millivolts, same idea, same principle. So I will put all of that on the screen and stuff like that so people have an understanding of that formula. So it's the wattage of the tube divided by the plate voltage times 0.7. That gives you 70% what they call dissipation. Now, you don't have to bias your amp at 70% dissipation. You could bias your amp like myself. I found that I biased the Rockerverb. I biased it a little cooler, 55, 60% dissipation. My ears, it sounds better that way. I'm not saying it's going to sound better that way for you, but to me it does. The advantage to that is you're saving the life of the tubes. The tubes aren't going to wear out as fast. But that also depends on, tube life all depends on how you play the amp, how loud you play the amp, and how often you play the amp loud. So that's like a whole other story. But I will put the whole formula on here for everybody so they can completely understand it. Okay, let's get into it. You're going to fire the amp back up in idle position, which means everything at 0, including EQ, volume, gain, everything at 0. Doesn't matter what channel you're on or whatever, everything at 0. and you always want to bias in full power, not half power. And I'll explain that to you in a second why. We bias at full power because that's the full plate voltage, okay? These amps that have the half power switches on them, what they do is when you go to half power, it actually drops the plate voltage significantly. Like it goes from like say 460 plate volts at full power all the way down to like 300, maybe in 20 plate voltage at half power. That being said, when it drops down to half power and it drops that plate voltage, it also adjusts the bias accordingly. So if you bias your power tubes at 70% dissipation at full power, when you drop it to half power, they're going to adjust and they're going to be biased at 70% for that plate voltage that it gets dropped to. We just had an issue with Eric actually where he accidentally biased the amp at half power and noticed he was getting a volume drop when he would go to full power after his bias was on and he was playing it. And the reason being is because he biased at half power, so the plate voltage is very low. So he rose his bias up to accommodate that. And then when he went to full power, that was actually, it made it a very cold bias, which will drop the volume, the overall output of the amp itself. Because biasing, what you're doing is you're literally adjusting how much current is flowing through each power tube. The more current, the more wattage you're getting out of each power tube. So EL34s are rated at 25 watts a piece, okay? So if I bias this amp for 100%, they call it dissipation. That's what it's called. If I bias this amp at 100% dissipation, that means I'm getting exactly 25 watts out of each tube. That also means that my tubes are probably going to last a few minutes. They will burn right up. You never bias at 100%. 70% is the mark, and we'll go over the math on how you figure that out and everything. So right now I'm gonna cut to another shot. Okay, so we're doing a little bit of a live shot here. If I hope this works out. What I'll do is I'll add maybe some really close-up pictures of like the bias pots and stuff like that as I get into that part of the video and everything. So we got 3 meters there. The 2 blue ones are set up for the bias adjustment. They're reading my milliamps on each bias probe that I have, and I'll insert a picture of the bias probe so you can see where they're at and what they look like and everything like that and how they work. The middle meter is just my regular Klein's multimeter that I'm going to use to test the plate voltage. This and when you're in there actually adjusting the bias wheel are really the only times that you need to be, I would say, in the amp. You know what I mean? We have a good rule of thumb as I have an electrical background with my line of work that I used to do and stuff like that. Keep one hand in one pocket, you know what I mean? So we don't have 2 hands in the amp at the same time. Then you're not completing a circuit. God forbid that ever happen. So like I said, the 2 blue meters right here, these are going to show us our bias adjustment, and the middle meter is going to show us our plate voltage. Now what I do usually is I have this black probe. I'm not sure if you could see it. The black probe is grounded. I have it kind of wedged in there against the screw hole. The whole base or chassis of the amp is pretty much a ground. Now the disadvantage you'll have, like, you won't be able to ground here because of the paint, you know what I mean? But that's a screw hole, so it's all cleared out, no paint, nothing there. I'll be able to get a good ground there, and I'll be able to get the exact plate voltage. So I'm just going to move this meter over out of the way for a second, and we're going to fire this up. All right, so we're turning it on. Now it's on. We're still in standby, okay? And you always want to make sure you're biasing these amps in full power, not half power. I think I explained before in the other part of the video. If you bias it at half power, the plate voltage is adjusted way low. When you go to full power, your bias adjustment will be really, really cold, and you'll actually do the reverse. You'll actually lose volume in full power than you would, as you usually do in half power. It's not a huge volume difference. We're talking anytime you double an amp, if you go from a 50 watt amp to a 100 watt amp, you're talking plus 3 decibels, really. It also depends on the efficiency of all the speakers and everything like that. So now that we've been on, we're going to go into full power, okay? So we'll do that quick, and we'll bring this back over so you can kind of see it. So I already kind of adjusted the bias for these. I'm using JJ EL34Ls, but I'll readjust it just to show you how to do such a thing. So right now, I'm probably within right around 70%. I'm just giving 70% a go again. I usually like a little cooler of a bias, 60%, 55%, with my Rockerverb. Other amps are different, you know what I mean? And this is all to a point to your ears. So, you know, I would never bias anything. I would not go over 75% of dissipation. If that's me, that's my rule of thumb. At that point, I feel like you're really putting a lot of stress on the tubes, and, you know, you're just asking for it. And I really don't think tonally the difference is, you know, I always tell people, you know, a lot of people get into a lot of the fairy dust and snake oil that's sold with guitar stuff. You want to sound good with guitar? Fucking practice. That's the best way I can explain that. Just fucking practice, definitely. So right now what we're going to do is we're going to check the plate voltage. And to do that, I have this on ground, right? Okay? So I'm going in with just one hand, okay? Pin number 3 on the power tube socket, which is up here. And I will take pictures of this and insert it into the video. So we go to pin 3. And we're looking at 441. Hope you could see that. So 441 is my plate voltage, okay? Now, this is when we will do some math, okay? I'm grabbing my tablet right now, and I'll see if I could even get this on there for you. Okay, so we're going to do the math here real quick. So like we said, EL34 is a 25 watt tube. So we're going to take the 25, so we got 25 divided by the plate voltage 441. That equals that number, times 0.7, which is 70%. There's your number, 39 milliamps. You can even round it up to 40 milliamps and you'll totally be fine. Okay, that's how we do that math. And I'll put that formula in the video. Okay, now that we did the math, and like I said, I've already have these kind of set up for biasing at 70%. We came up with 39 milliamps. You could have even rounded that up to 40 if you wanted to. That is not going to make the slightest difference. A nice, I don't know if you could see that too good, but a nice small flathead screwdriver. It's kind of blurry. There you go. This works great because the pots inside of here are actually very, very tiny. They are really, really tiny. They're on 2 little square blue modules. I will insert, you know, great close-up pictures of these so you can see them. But I'm adjusting the right one, so that's going to be this meter. So you're going to see as it goes way down. And these work opposite. So if you have the amp set up this way, the way I have it, so this is the ass end of the amp, the speaker out and everything like that. Oh, and that's another thing I want to mention. You always have a speaker hooked to the amp at all times when you're doing this, okay? You need the load on there. So as I turn this counterclockwise, it raises the bias. As I turn it clockwise, it lowers the bias, as you can see that. So we want to be right around 39, okay? And it's very touchy. I mean, very, very touchy. So 39.1, that's fine. 39.5, you're fine, wherever, you know what I mean? This one we already have set, so we're not going to go through and, I mean, we could adjust it, it's fine. So same thing, counterclockwise, you see it's raising it. I hope you can see that. And we'll bring it back down, back to 39. You know, as close to 39 as you get, 39.1, 2, 3. Now that will fluctuate for a little bit. If I just turned the amp on and I just did the bias, I'd go walk away, eat a sandwich. I'd leave it on just like this, no problem. Make sure nobody's going to get into it or touch it or nothing like that. And then I would come back and make sure that these numbers are you know, within where you're at. If it went to like 39.5, I wouldn't even give a shit about it. That's totally fine. But sometimes the bias can drift a little bit, up or down. You know what I mean? So I always recommend leave it on for a good 10, 15 minutes. Walk away from it. Let it do its thing. You know, once it settles in, then it's good. You know, this is probably pretty close. You see it going up and down. I did just adjust it, but I've already had it on before I did the video, and I already had it in the area, so we're going to leave it as is. Now, with turning the amp off, I want to give you guys a quick tip, okay? If there's a day that you know you're going to work on the amp, you're going to be inside the amp, you're going to be doing biasing or anything like that, the best thing to do is before you take the amp out of the chassis or anything like that and you're playing it or whatever, turn it off. Leave the standby in full, okay? Leave it in play mode, full or half, whatever one you're doing. Turn the amp off. It will literally drain almost all the caps. That will work on almost every single amp out there. Even vintage amps that I work on, I notice it works on them. I just built a JTM 45, and Stu Mac, you know, sent me the kit and everything like that. And that was one of their tips and tricks in there. Leave the amp in play mode, so not in standby. A lot of people will put it in standby and then turn it off. No, turn it off while it's in play mode. And then after 5-10 minutes, whatever, then we'll put it back to standby. And then this way, so when you turn it back on, you know, you're good to go. These modern amps that are not using rectifier tubes, you know, there's a huge argument. They really don't, I don't think they actually need a standby switch, but that being said, we're not going into that. But I hope this helps. I'm going to edit this all up today and hopefully get it done today so I can get it posted on the group. You know, another, like I said too, this isn't like a disclaimer. I'm not saying everybody should go in and bias their own amps. Everybody should just, no. You got to have a little bit of a know-how. You got to do your research. You got to do, you know, make sure you have the correct tools for the job and everything like that. I don't want just regular people just going in there and doing something like this, because you can literally kill yourself, okay? I just want to give one more disclaimer about, you know, how I was turning the amp off and how that will discharge most of the caps and stuff like that. Don't ever use that as a 100% certainty. If you're getting into tech, you know, tech kind of work and you're starting to work on amps and stuff like that, always use your multimeter to check capacitors, resistors, anything that's going to retain any type of voltage. Always double check. You know, don't ever assume, okay? What's that saying? Assuming makes an ass out of you and me, and it's the truth. I've had many situations in my line of my actual day job where I was an HVAC tech and pipe fitter and welder and stuff like that, and I've had a few situations where, oh yeah, the disconnect is off and blah blah blah, and then, you know, I take 120 volts to the right side of my arm or something. Don't ever assume. Don't trust anything but yourself and the meter itself, okay? All right, guys, hope you enjoyed this. Thanks. Bye.